Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Our webinar today, as you likely know, is the second in a series of webinars that focus on healthy housing. And this week's webinar focuses on preventing household pests. So I am Axton Betts Hamilton, and I'm an assistant professor and undergraduate program coordinator of consumer affairs at South Dakota State University. And in that role, you may have heard my name for my work in the identity theft space. That it's gotten a lot of attention over the past couple of years. So my name was kind of synonymous with identity theft perpetrated by family members. But I also do some work in the housing space. I'm part of a research group looking at aging in place in rural areas and also do some outreach work with healthy housing. So that's what uh, brings me to co-hosting this webinar with Sarah. And this series of webinars is in part funded by a grant from the National Healthy Homes Partnership. And Sarah, of course, is my co-presenter. And Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, welcome everyone. Sarah Crymans with the University of Minnesota Extension, and I am located in West Central Minnesota. My office is in Morris, co-located with the West Central Research and Outreach Center. If you've been to the horticulture gardens there, our office is really close. So I was super pleased when Axton contacted me and asked if we wanted to partner on this project. I was, of course, yes, we do. And while I have the microphone, I do want to introduce Rick Meyer. Rick, if you can give us a wave. He is working with our University of Minnesota Extension. He's a regional support staff person and is serving as our webinar producer today. So if you have any tech issues, send a private message in the chat over to Rick and he can help you out. He's also going to be helping us with starting and stopping the recording, but also monitoring the chat. So be sure to put any questions that you have in the chat. Thanks, Axton.
Okay, great. So before I get into the content of today's webinar, I do want to point out that the National Healthy Homes Partnership provided funding to send uh, kits for each of these three webinars to the first 50 registrants. So if you've received a box from me with some supplies, that's because you were one of the first 50 registrants. Not all of the boxes have gone out yet because let me tell you, it's a challenge to find some supplies right now with some of the supply chain shortages, including mailing boxes and gloves. I live in Waterloo, Iowa in the summer. We have plenty of stores, but finding gloves is a challenge. So, and cardboard boxes to ship things in. So, 43 of the boxes have gone out. Seven more have yet to go out because I still need to find supplies. So, if you receive a box from me in the next few days, that's what it's for. If you've already received the box from me, you know what it's for. So, there are a few supplies in there related to cleaning. So there's some trash bags, there's some gloves, there's some wipes, and it will make more sense as to why we chose those items for the managing pest kit as we move through the webinar. So the learning objectives, by the end of the hour, we hope that you'll be able to list the connections between health, well-being, and the home environment. We've got a little chat activity for you to do. For that, um, we hope you'll be able to identify home pest management techniques. Hint, hint, they're not all pesticide related. And we hope that you'll be able to list integrated pest management actions. So why do we care about managing pests? For some folks on the call, you probably think, oh, pests are annoying. They're icky to look at, they bite, but there are a lot of reasons why we care about pest management. So chemicals in and around the home can poison people or pets and have long-term health effects. Every 13 seconds, a poison control center in the United States answers a call about a possible poisoning, and more than 90% of these occur in the home. Now, not all of these are related to pesticides. Poisoning can result from medicines as well. In fact, I uh, saw a news article in my Google News feed last night that melatonin poisoning is on the rise with young children. So the National Poison Control Center is receiving lots of calls about, you know, accidental melatonin overdoses in children. So, certainly medicines, pesticides, household cleaning products, carbon monoxide, and lead as well. If you were in our uh, first webinar in this series a couple of weeks ago, we talked about lead. That's more of an issue for homes that were built prior to 1978. Pesticides are used in about 3 of 4 US homes, in part because they're readily available. You can go to Walmart, you can go to the grocery store, and you can get ant bait, you can pick up a can of Raid. They're accessible, they're easy to use, and they're a quick fix. But we're going to talk about some non-chemical ways to manage pests because, again, these pesticides and these chemicals can be harmful to humans as well as pets. So this slide is entitled Your Home, and here you see a picture of a single family detached dwelling. One thing we want to emphasize is that the tips and techniques and information that you'll receive today through this webinar can be applied regardless of the type of home that you live in. So if you live in a single family detached dwelling, an apartment, a mobile home, whatever the case may be, the tips and information that you'll receive today, you can apply in your particular residence, regardless of the style of that residence. And so this cute little infographic here, or word cloud, I should say, that's in the shape of a cockroach, um, is just to open the conversation for, do you have pests? I'm not going to ask you to put that in the chat, but I think we've all encountered pests in our home, and we might not know what that pest is. In fact, my husband and I were coming in the garage the other day, and there was this what I think was a gigantic, gross-looking beetle in the driveway. And I'm like, "Oh, Rob, what is that?" And my husband's name's Rob, and he's like, "Oh, it's just some kind of beetle." Well, that's not really identification. Some kind of beetle, okay, but what? So if you're not sure of what the pest is, you could take a photograph of it and provide that to your local extension office. You can also take, a sample of the pest to your local extension office, and they can help you identify it. And identification of pests are important so you know the best solution in order to get rid of those pests. Because if you use a pesticide for, say, a particular type of beetle, but the beetle that's in your house doesn't respond to that particular pesticide, it's not going to work, and you're going to be exposed to chemicals. So it's important to really identify what pests you have in your home. So pesticides are powerful tools for controlling pests. However, there are other tools um, available for use in pest control, but many of those pose a greatly reduced risk to human health and the environment than do pesticides. Integrated pest management, IPM, and this is an acronym you're going to see later in the presentation, is an effective and environmentally sensitive approach that makes use of a variety of these tools. Basically, non-chemical methods of controlling and eliminating pests. So integrated pest management doesn't say, hey, all pesticides are bad, never use them. But integrated pest management instead says, let's try some of these non-chemical methods first before resorting to those pesticides. So, question that I would like y'all to answer in the chat as we transition things over to Sarah is what are the connections between health, well-being, and pests? So, put your responses in the chat and I will turn things over to Sarah.
And I'm going to wait a moment while folks respond here. Emily, no pests equals less stress, right? We can all use that in this day of age. Yeah, this day, less stress is better. Shelby, yes, pests can leave droppings or get into food, making environments less healthy. Definitely disease, rashes, allergies, pests can affect the health of our families and pets. Yep, a lot of health diseases. Yep, and I'm going to put a response in there to Rachel about the extension program. Ants are not welcome dinner guests, right? Definitely not picnic guests, but not dinner guests either. Yep, eliminating can improve health and happiness. It can ruin our food. Yes, all very, very good responses. Thank you for sharing those. So when we look at what is a healthy home anyway, um, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development states that a healthy home is one that is designed, constructed, maintained, or rehabilitated in a manner that prevents diseases and injuries that result from housing-related hazards. And so we want healthy homes and they are important to us. That home environment is super important because there's so many things in our home environment that can cause sickness and illness. And of course, today we're focusing on pests. So there is this great resource called Everyone Deserves a Safe and Healthy Home, and that is available from HUD, the Housing and Urban Development folks. So we encourage you to access that nice booklet online. Um, it is really a comprehensive resource. It looks at key topics related to healthy housing, including pest management. So take a look at that booklet, use it as a reference and a resource. All right. So if you were on our home safety webinar a couple weeks ago, and if you're going to be on the hoarding, addressing hoarding webinar in a few weeks, we are using this slide in all three of the webinars, the 8 principles of healthy homes, because they are so important, right? So keeping our home dry, very important. Preventing water from entering our home through the roof or rain from entering due to poor drainage or maybe plumbing leaks. It is really important. And when we think about pests, and we're going to be talking in a little bit, they like to have something to drink. And if we have water available to them, that can be a bad thing. Keeping a clean house, right? Controlling dust and contaminants, creating smooth, cleanable resources, reducing clutter as much as possible, and using effective wet cleaning methods. So cleaning, right? I think I would like a maid to come in a couple times a month or once a month. But keeping things picked up and put away, there's so much benefit to that. Keeping it safe, storing the poisons out of reach of children, making sure they're labeled appropriately, securing loose rugs. There we go. That's a tongue twister. Loose rugs, or removing those loose rugs. And again, having clutter picked up so we don't have items that can be tripped on to avoid falls. Installing smoke and carbon monoxide detectors fits in this area, and of course keeping fire extinguishers on hand. Keeping it well ventilated, bathrooms and kitchens, to reduce some of that extra moisture that happens in the air. Now you see number 5 says pest free, and that's what we're definitely focusing on. And all pests look for food, water, and shelter. And so we want to make sure sure we're addressing those. So sealing cracks and openings throughout the home, storing food in pest-resistant containers, and then if needed, using sticky traps and baits in closed containers along with the least toxic pesticides available. We'll be diving deeper into those items. And then keeping things contaminant free. So when we're thinking about lead paint and those sorts of things, keeping our home well maintained. So doing those routine inspections and cleaning and repairs on our homes routinely is really important. Definitely if we take time to do those minor repairs and address those minor problems before they get to be bigger problems, we're going to be much better off. And especially in the stress department, someone had mentioned stress earlier, and then keeping it thermally controlled, right? At a comfortable level. So we just want to address these principles of healthy homes. Now, Axton, help me out here. We have 8 principles of healthy homes and we've listed 7. Did we miss one or is it really 7? What
No,
is
it's
the
it's
8th one?
8. Eight is actually thermally controlled. Somehow we deleted that.
Okay, so I talked about it, but it's not on the slide. All of a
Right.
sudden I was like, oh my goodness, there we go. We will get that one fixed for sure. Thanks, Axton. I appreciate that. So now we have another question for everyone to respond in the chat. Thanks, Axton, for putting number 8 there. What pests are you concerned about in your home and your environment? What are your biggest concerns? Shelby saying mice. Ants, wasps and mice, spiders, ants, mice, mosquitoes, wood ticks and mice. Yes, box elder bugs, mice, moth. Oh my gosh, look at all these spiders, ants, spiders, centipedes, hornets, ants, all of the above, ants, ants. Yes, oh my gosh, definitely. Ants by the sliding door. Ladybug beetles, stink bugs, squash bugs. Yes, box elder bugs, right? I like to think that I keep my home fairly clean and I think we do some good maintenance, but we live on an acreage and there have been times when we've had mice in our house. And I think Axton gets to talk about mice, but I'll share a mouse story at that time. I've also dealt with ants and different things as well. So I think there's no shame in admitting that we have concerns about some of these. It's just taking steps to address them. Thank you. Oh, deer, Jamie, really, you have deer that come up to your home and maybe are eating your landscaping, perhaps, I'm guessing, all day long. God, I hope you have a nice camera out there to capture some pictures. I don't think we're discussing deer today, but Rick, I don't know if we're able to find a publication from Extension about that, as well as the beavers. Bed bugs, we're going to be talking about bed bugs too. So thank you everyone for sharing those comments. So how do pests get into our home? So here's four ways that they can get into our home. The top one there shows tree branches touching the house. And so a pest could climb down from that limb to the house and get in and under siding and get in that way. Then we've also got some plant block boxes or flower boxes there, perhaps with an open window. And so the pest could live in that plant box and climb in through that open window, or get in that way as well. The third item there is pointing at the car. That's a little bit more difficult to see, but it might be something that you brought into the home. An old mattress is an obvious example of an item that might have pests on it. I know years ago, right when we went to the video store, we and bring home the VHSs, right? Cockroaches and things would hide in there and go from one person's home to the next because it was nice and warm in that VCR player, right? We're not using VHS tapes very much anymore, but things that we're bringing into our home. My son had a friend who got a couch at a thrift store, and an upholstered couch, and took it home and ended up with some rashes and a variety of things. And they figured out it came from something that was living in the couch. So we do need to be careful about those items. Rick, thank you so much for adding links to the chat about deer and living with wildlife in your home. So Axton, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Okay, so we're going to briefly talk about four pests, and then of course we're adding Asian beetles and box elder bugs and squash bugs briefly to this list as well. But we're really going to focus on cockroaches, ants, rodents. So mice are going to be part of that conversation, and bed bugs. So I know there are folks who are interested, I think, in pretty much all of these pests, which is great. You're in the right place. So we're going to talk about what they look like. So we're going to see pictures. So fair warning, if you're eating lunch, you might want to stop eating lunch because we do have some icky pictures. We're going to talk about how they reproduce. We're going to talk about where they live and what do they eat and drink. So cockroaches. So cockroaches, I think of all of the pests that we're talking about today are probably the worst in terms of being harmful to humans because they carry filth. They um, can destroy our food. They can destroy book bindings and fabrics, and they have they can produce a very nauseating secretion from their mouth as well as their glands that if we smell that, I mean, it's not a good odor. So it can be very off-putting for us. And folks can have allergic reactions to being in proximity to cockroaches. So, a couple of types of cockroaches that you might see are the American cockroach. And when I think of cockroaches, this is the visual that I get in my head. These big, gross-looking, kind of reddish brown, you know, big bugs that are obviously cockroaches. There are also German cockroaches that are smaller. They, I, it's a little hard to tell in this picture, but they have two black bands going down their back. So these are both examples of cockroaches. They just have a different appearance. And then how do cockroaches reproduce? So uh, cockroaches will lay egg cases, and there are multiple eggs in each egg case. So there's a picture of an egg case here, which to me resembles, uh, you know, uh, what mice leave behind. Sometimes when you see mice evidence, and within those egg cases, again, there are lots of eggs, and when they hatch, that means there are lots of nymphs or babies, and the nymphs just look like baby cockroaches. They're just, smaller versions of the adults. So in eliminating cockroaches, one key thing that you have to worry about is eliminating these egg cases. In fact, I'll share a story. Um, I worked for a time in a very old building in a small town. It was a city hall building. It used to be a bank building, so it had been there since probably the early 1900s, maybe even late 1800s. And of course, there were cockroaches in the building. And the solution that was being applied was have a pest service come in and spray periodically. And that was killing the adults, but there was nothing really done to identify where these egg cases were and eliminate those because magically, you know, while the adult ones were dying, there were babies hatching out pretty much all the time. There was no effort to identify where the cockroaches were coming in. So it was a perpetual problem in the building that I worked at.
Paxton, there's a question about whether they're found in Minnesota. And, Kay has never seen cockroaches
Sure,
in Minnesota.
sure. So cockroaches, to the best of my knowledge, are all across North America. So, I mean, in this area, I mean, South Dakota, Brookings, South Dakota is right across the border from Minnesota. So I've seen American cockroaches. I have not seen German cockroaches. So I would say yes, they are in Minnesota. Um, I would also say that's great that you've never seen them. We don't want to see them.
Yes, and so I'm actually looking here at one of our University of Minnesota publications, and four kinds are prevalent or available in Minnesota: the German cockroach, the brown banded, and the American. And I'm not seeing what the fourth one is, but yes, they are here. Yeah, Cassie has seen them in their break room.
Yep, and we'll get there in a second on what they eat. I'm sure the cockroaches were looking for break types of food. Maybe even getting into a vending machine if you had a vending machine in the break room. So where do cockroaches live? They live anywhere in a home, or they can live anywhere in a home. But they prefer to be near food and water, but they also need warmth. So number one place for cockroaches to live, kitchens, because they have things to eat. They'll eat our food. And they need water and they need warmth, and they can get that from being near appliances. The number two place for cockroaches to live is the bathroom, because the bathroom, of course, is a good source of water. They like to live in cracks and crevices. So I can remember being in this city hall building that used to be a bank building and seeing the cockroaches crawl out from cracks and in the concrete near the floor. So cracks and crevices, that's where they like to live. Finding ways to seal those, I think, is important if you're concerned about cockroaches. So what do cockroaches eat and drink? Pretty much anything. So crumbs, grease. So think about drip pans on your stove, right? There's probably grease and crumbs and other things in there that can attract cockroaches and other bugs. In fact, I rent a townhouse up in Brookings, and our property management company, when they do their annual inspection, they check to make sure the drip pans are clean, because they've had problems with tenants having dirty drip pans, and they've had pest infestations because of it. They'll eat trash. They'll eat cardboard glue. They'll drink water from sinks, pet bowls. So pet bowls and pet food are really attractive to cockroaches. Shower stalls, AC units, sweaty or leaking pipes, and refrigerator drip pans and gaskets. So cockroaches don't need a lot of water. It can be a small amount of water, and that can be enough for several cockroaches to survive. So, Asian lady beetles. I know we've got a couple of folks that are specifically interested in this. I did link a resource here, and you'll receive these slides. It's an extension publication from the University of Minnesota. So just some quick facts about Asian lady beetles. They don't cause damage to your home. So very different from cockroaches in that respect, right? They don't sting or carry disease. So again, in that regard, they're not as bad as cockroaches. However, they can bite hard enough to break human skin, and sometimes that can feel like a sting. There's a little tiny little sting. So these Asian lady beetles, they're not stinging, they're biting because they're looking for food. Exposure to dead beetles can cause allergic reactions in some individuals. And these Asian lady beetles, they're not all bad. So one thing that this extension publication discusses is that they do eat different types of aphids that can cause damage to gardens and crops. So they are beneficial in the right environment. Of course, that's not in our homes. So to keep them out of your home, Seal all spaces and cracks an eighth of an inch or larger. Because, like a lot of pests, they come in through cracks and crevices. So, doors, windows, where wires and pipes enter the home, those are all places that Asian lady beetles can get in. And then window screens. So, even if you have just a small tear in a window screen, it's worth repairing that or even replacing the window screen because, again, that's a place where Asian lady beetles can come in as well.
Exton, I had to laugh on that slide. I've never really thought about stings versus bites when it comes to pests. It's just one is just as bad as the other to me.
Right, they both hurt. So, um, a note about box elder and squash bugs. For the sake of time, we're not going to do a deep dive on this. You see a picture of a box elder bug here. These are really common, I think, throughout the Midwest and maybe even throughout the whole country. Um, to keep them out of your house, again, like Asian lady beetles, like cockroaches, one way to do that is to seal cracks and crevices and then vacuum them up. Particularly with squash bugs, don't squash them because when you squash them, they smell. And the secretion from the squash bugs can stain carpets or any flooring or any surface where you've squashed the bug. So of course we want to avoid that. Now I'll turn things over to Sarah to talk about ants.
Thanks, Saxton. So that's a lovely picture, isn't it? Right? So we're going to talk about ants. Lots of different kinds of ants are listed at the top of this next slide here. Pavement, carpenter, acrobat, pharaoh, odorous, fire ants, Argentine, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of different ants. And ants are very social insects that live together in colonies. And the information that we have found shows that those colonies range in size from hundreds to millions of individuals, depending upon the species. And that just makes me kind of cringe, right? So if you have one ant, you've got a lot of ants is the bottom line there. Within each colony, the different ants have different roles. Similar, I think about bees in a beehive, everyone has a different role. Same thing with ants. We're gonna go here. We've got the queens that lay the eggs. And then they have adult workers that take care of the eggs and the larvae, the pupae, and getting food. And different ant species have different lifespans. And so everybody has a role, and there are typically a lot of them. Think about where they live. I'm going to go back 2 slides here. In this case, the light outlet in the grass outside the home. I think the bottom right picture is a pillow, I'm guessing. I do not know if anyone has a guess on what that bottom left-hand picture is. Is that a leaf there maybe? Okay. Okay. A spoon. Yes. Okay. A spoon in the kitchen. Thank you. Thanks, Andrea. A spoon, right? So ants can live pretty much anywhere, but again, similar to what Axton was sharing earlier, they want food and water and shelter. So spaces behind walls, in the cabinets, in the appliances. I hadn't really thought about that. Axton talked about the drip pans on the range or the drawer under my oven there, right? I have heard of ants in dishwashers as well. So any types of appliances behind windows and door frames, beneath floors, concrete slabs, potted plants, right? I'm going to get those plants out of there if you're seeing that. And then, of course, outdoors. We've got grandchildren with us this week, and they are just so impressed with ants. We've been looking at a lot of ant hills outside, but open areas, shaded areas, under pavement, stones, mulch. So they like to dig in and burrow beneath house siding. So pretty much anywhere these ants are going to go and live. So what do they eat and drink? Just about anything. There seems to be a common theme from one pest to the next. And again, depending on their species, that they probably have some preferences. But they're going to seek out food from a variety of sources. Food with sugar or fat content definitely plays a role. So we need to watch for that, not to leave those sorts of things lying around. And if the food source is good, the worker ants that look for food will leave an odor trail for the other worker ants to follow. So they're communicating by laying down this odor trail. Um, so we want to make sure we keep our surfaces clean and wiped up, and try to get rid of those odor trails. As far as drinks, they're just like other pests. They find water to drink in the obvious sources, under sinks, on counters, floors, pet bowls, the shower stalls, sweaty pipes, drip pans, air conditioner units, any places that you would find moisture in your home. Definitely, the bathrooms that Exton was talking about earlier as well. So if you believe you're being infested by ants, and you probably verify that by seeing them, right? It's important to trace back to the point of where they are entering from the outside. And that can be challenging, but doing your best to walk around the house, looking at the foundation, looking at the siding, looking at the windows. Do we have any broken screens? Where does it seem like they might be coming in? It could be along that windowsill. It could be beneath an entrance door, or maybe where the exterior siding meets that foundation wall. Ants usually prefer to travel along lines and edges. And so again, when tracing ant trails indoors or outdoors, pay particular attention to cracks, seams, and edges created by baseboards, maybe the tack strip beneath perimeter edges of carpeting, mortar joints, foundation siding, interface, that type of thing. Ant control can be very frustrating, but with the use of some caulking to decrease entryways, keeping counters clean, and the use of bait station management can help the problem. And so you really need to be persistent in those efforts to eliminate ants. Axton, I'm so pleased that you got to do this section and not me.
Okay, so I have the pleasure of talking about rodents with all of you today. We're going to talk about mice and rats. Again, I have some pictures to allow you to compare mice and rats. Mice and rats are problematic because they carry disease. They can contaminate food, and like this little guy here, um, they can chew on things in your home and create damage. So, mice versus rats. So, when we see them, you know, as we go through our daily life, if we see them, we tend to think, ew, right? Oh, you back away. You're not really focused on the features of a mouse versus a rat. You just know you've got a rodent. So these two pictures here on the right, I think, are a good comparison of mice versus rats. And in a lot of ways, they're opposite. So we see here with a rat, they have small ears, but a mouse has large ears. We see that a rat has a broad head, but a mouse has more of a triangular head. See that rats have a wide muzzle, but mice have a small, narrow muzzle, and so on and so forth. So mice and rats, when you really look at them, they're actually very different, which I know is hard to do in the moment. You're like, ooh, there's a rodent, but also rats are a lot bigger than mice in most circumstances.
And I'm guessing, Axon, you could probably tell a bit from droppings, even if you don't see the little critter itself, the size of the dropping might give you a clue too.
Yes, that's a good point. Of course, for lack of a better way to say it, the bigger the critter, the larger the size of the droppings. So, if they're bigger, it's likely a rat. If they're smaller, it's likely a mouse. So mice breed rapidly. A single pair can quickly become an infestation. If you see a mouse or you see droppings, the nest is close by because mice don't travel more than 30 feet from the nest. Rats, however, are slower to reach reproductive maturity relative to mice, but can have 6 or more litters a year, which still means they can very quickly become an infestation. Rats will travel farther than mice. They'll travel up to 450 feet from their burrow, but prefer to live close to food and water sources. So, where do they live? Mice live where shelter and materials are available. So they're really not picky as long as they have the shelter and materials they need, like shredded paper, burlap, fabric, insulation, or other fibrous materials. What comes to mind when I see this description is attics. Nests resemble a woven mass or a ball, and they are usually 4 to 6 inches in diameter. So rats, we distinguish between roof rats and Norway rats. Roof rats are generally high up, so they'll live in attics, rafters, and cross beams of buildings. They form runways along pipes and wires. So roof rats are high up. You might hear a rat in an attic, for example, or they might be in a barn. A Norway rat, they're generally on the ground. Um, So they could be in basements, they could be on the ground floor, they can be in sewers and subways or in burrows under buildings. So, what do they eat and drink? Um, they'll eat and drink a lot of things, but seeds eh, are generally preferred. So, one thing I want to point out is if you have a bird feeder, that could be an attractant for rodents. My husband and I have a bird feeder right outside our back porch here in Waterloo, Iowa, and the birds make a mess. They go through a lot of feed, but a lot of it ends up on the ground. So, that could be an attractant for mice. Right now, it's an attractant for a very fat squirrel that lives in our backyard. But just keep in mind that if you do have a bird feeder and there's seed on the ground, it could be an attractant for rodents. Now I will turn things over to Sarah to talk about bed bugs.
Great, thanks, Axton. It's we're using a lot of time here, but it's really I was going to use the word exciting, maybe not exciting, but there's a lot of information to share. So we're going to move on to bed bugs here. So bed bugs make me start to itch, right? And when you have to travel, when you do travel for vacation or work, I'm always a bit concerned about staying in hotels and all of that. But so we're going to share with you what to look for. The adults are about the size of an apple seed, so about an 1/8 inch wide by about a 1/4 inch long. They're oval, they're red to brown, dark brown in color, no wings on these things. And they feed through what they call a 3-segmented piercing or sucking beak. But they have antennas, they have small eyes, they feed on human blood, and they can be 2 different shapes depending upon when they last fed. So this kind of reminds me of wood ticks, right? So if they're flat, they've been unfed, but if they've been fed, they're gonna be a little more expanded and full of blood, right? So they will quickly digest that within a couple of hours, and then they become flat again. So we need to watch for that. So again, a recently fed bed bug will be plump. Um, so similar in that case to the wood ticks. Um, I have a coworker that used to work in the hospitality industry, so at hotels, and she said one of the big indicators that they watched for, that they had their housekeeping staff watch for, would be on the sheets for tiny little specks of blood for bed bugs feeding on arms and legs. So they may leave behind some little stains. So this is the life cycle of a bed bug. I'm not going to go into detail, but kind of similar to some of the other insects that we have looked at. So they use this simple metamorphosis system or process. So the 5 stages are normally completed in 1 to 2 months, depending upon temperature and humidity, available hosts. And so they can survive inside dwellings for several months without a blood meal, but they do not molt until they engorge on blood. And so the adults can survive even longer under the same conditions, but again, females do not develop eggs unless they're fed. They feed on the blood, so maybe eventually starving them off if there's no no blood to be had. So where do they live, right? They're named bed bugs for a reason. So they're nocturnal and primarily active at night. So they can be found most likely where there are food sources at night, and that's going to be our beds. They're small. They hide in those cracks and crevices, especially in the box springs, mattresses, clothing, maybe furniture in a resting area. They could also hide behind curtains, phones, electrical outlets, the pictures that we have hanging on the wall, smoke detectors. They could even be hiding in our phones. They prefer wood and fabric rather than plastic and metal. And bed bugs can build up to large numbers before they're noticed, and they're very hard to eliminate from the home environment. And we did have a question earlier. Heidi was talking or asking about the nuisance problem, Axton, when you were talking about a multi-unit home versus a single family home. And I think all of these can be nuisances in those single family homes as well as the multi-dwelling. Definitely, they can move next door a little quicker in a multi-family dwelling, but definitely issues here in our single family dwellings. So the bed bugs need us, right? They need humans. They feed on blood. And again, they can live for a long time without eating. They can live for almost a year. The longevity depends upon temperature. They live 5 to 10 times longer at 50 degrees Fahrenheit than they do at 80 degrees. So the warmer it is, the less they're going to live. The shorter lives they're going to have. But bed bugs feed almost exclusively on humans. However, they are known to produce viable offspring on mice, chickens, pigeons, bats, rabbits. They can survive on pets such as birds and dogs and cats and hamsters. But in fact, they've also been found feeding on a pet cat bowl, even though there are humans present in the room. So primarily people, but they do look for other sources as well. Axton.
Okay, so I'm going to start the conversation on integrated pest management. So there are several steps in integrated pest management. There's inspection, there's monitors, there's non-chemical treatment methods, unit preparation, and pesticides. So we're going to go through each of these steps in detail, well, as much detail as we can in the time that we have left. So inspection, this photo here is a picture of a bed bug that was found in a recliner. So in the footstool part of a recliner that was taken apart. So inspection simply means, you're looking for it. You see evidence of pests. You see the pests themselves, or in the case of rodents, you might see droppings, you might see damage from their chewing, but you visually see that there's a problem. Then I will turn things back over to Sarah.
Thanks, Axton. So monitors. So here's an example of a pest monitor. This one helps monitor bed bugs. I'm not so familiar with them, but they are here. Monitors are good for two stages. First is the detection of early bed bug problems. And then the second is evaluating results of treatment programs. So when we think about taking a holistic approach to bed bug control, that would include making the bed an island, the National Center for Healthy Housing suggests. So if the infestation is confined to that bed or contained to that, they say isolate it from the rest of the room, which sounds kind of interesting, or I didn't realize that was possible to do. But what they suggest is to pull the bed away from the hall, put the bed frame legs in scepters. This creates a moat. And then they suggest putting talcum powder in the moat and on the sides of the moat, so the bugs can't climb up that. It's probably too slippery with that talcum powder. And you need to keep that talcum powder fresh, otherwise that method won't work. And so this bed as an island idea also helps folks feel more rest assured that the bugs are not climbing up onto that bed. So another thing to do here, so this is German cockroach nymphs and adults caught on a sticky trap that indicates the trap may have been placed near a nest. And so trapping pests can be an effective means of monitoring the number and kinds of pests in the home. So trapping pests, of course, also takes them out of action. It can't feed or reproduce when it's trapped. So sticky traps are used as information gathering tools. They'll alert you to a growing infestation in a certain area. You want to check those regularly and change the traps as needed. Traps that are covered with pests can be taken to your maybe to your county extension office, or you could call you could look at some of our pictures on our website and do some comparison there. So those sticky traps are good to look at. Glue traps are a type of trap used for mice and other small animals. So those are easy and cheap to use, but it takes a very long time for the rodent to die and makes noises that can be disturbing to some, right? So you want to take some steps to bring an end to that. Adult rodents will usually avoid the glue traps, but you might want to consider using box style traps or putting the glue boards inside short sections of a PVC pipe, because those mice prefer tunnels and dark areas, and they typically wouldn't detect that sticky trap in a PVC pipe. Non-chemical treatment methods, Axton.
Okay, so non-chemical treatment methods essentially are ways to keep pests out of your home. So, here the slide says exclusion, but again, going back to sealing cracks and crevices and uh, fixing screens, window screens that are torn or otherwise damaged. So essentially, these are non-chemical ways to create barriers to pests, to make it difficult to get into your home and send those pests on their merry way to somewhere else. I do want to talk briefly about mattress encasements for bed bugs. These can be used as a preventative, and then these can also be used in instances of bed bug infestations. So mattress encasements, this is one that is on Amazon.com. I personally don't think it matters which brand you purchase particularly, because what a mattress encasement does is it encases the mattress and it keeps bed bugs out as a preventative. If there is a bed bug infestation, a mattress encasement will trap the bed bugs in the mattress so there's nothing for them to feed on, and they can't get out, so they will end up dying, which is, of course, when you have an infestation, what you want. So other non-chemical treatment methods, which we've covered in other areas of the presentation, include minimizing access to food and water. So no pet dishes left out overnight. I know that can be a challenge depending on the feeding nature of your pet. We have a cat that when we take away the food at night, he lets us know his displeasure throughout the night. So I realize that can be a challenge. It might make your quality of life a little more difficult for a short period of time. Don't leave dirty dishes in the sink. Fix leaky faucets, and keep countertops clean and wipe with soap and water to temporarily disrupt ant trails. And then mice traps. So this is, of course, an example of what I call an old style mouse trap. These, when they catch a mouse, the aftermath is not necessarily pretty to look at. So there are mouse traps that the mouse can go into and it traps them, and you don't really see a lot of the aftermath. So that's a choice as well. The important thing about trapping mice is that you put the traps in areas where they walk. So along walls, corners, and known runways. So not in the middle of a room, but along the wall, in the corner. I had a mouse that I knew was coming through an unsealed pipe in near the water heater in an old apartment I lived in. And so I put the mouse trap right next to the water heater where I knew it was running, and I ended up catching it. So using baits to kill and trap rodents, just a couple of quick points here about mice versus rats. With mice, you want to bait and set many traps. It's recommended 6 traps for each mouse that you think that you have. You want to set these immediately. With rats, you want to place many traps, but you don't want to set the traps right away because rats are smart. They'll learn that, oh, that's a trap if they see one of their rat friends or family get trapped. So you want to bait the traps, let them feed on the traps for a while, build that trust, and then once they become comfortable feeding on them, then set the traps and kill the rats. Then I'll turn things over to Sarah.
Thanks, Axton. I'm amazed at, right? 6 traps for every mouse you think you have. And you got to be smarter than the rat or the mouse. So very important. So we're going to talk real briefly about unit preparation. What can you do in your home? And you can see this three-legged stool here. If you have pest presence, they need water, food, and habitat. So if you eliminate one of those, the stool's going to topple over, and that's going to be a good way to get started on eliminating those pests. So look around. What are they eating? Where are they getting water? And where are they living? So focusing on those 3 items there is really important. Reducing clutter is a huge issue. And Axton and I are going to be doing a hoarding webinar on the 29th if you haven't signed up for that. But just look at all of the areas where pests can live, and I think I'm seeing a soda can, and I'm guessing there's some other food sources in that mess as well. So reducing clutter is really important. You can see a before and after picture here. So getting in the habits of cleaning up and picking up, and like Axton talked about, not leaving dishes in the sink. So getting in the habit of getting dishes into the dishwasher if you have one, or washing up the dishes, and just doing that right after, so we're not leaving leftovers for the pests in our home. And then pesticides, Axton.
Okay, so pesticides are last step or last resort in the integrated pest management model. Couple of points: pesticides are meant to kill the pests. Um, some folks think that, well, if it's organic, it's safe, versus a non-organic product. Neither are safe if they're used incorrectly, so it's critical to read the label and follow the instructions. Um, Foggers and bombs are not very effective, and mainly what they're most effective at is exposing people and pets to pesticides. So, it's recommended to avoid those. Uh, Two different types of pesticides are contact and bait. Contact kills the pest as soon as they come in contact with it. Bait pesticides have a food attractant. The pests go towards what they think is a food source. They ingest the bait and then they die. So, of course, as I mentioned, you want to use pesticides safely. Read and follow the directions on the label. You want to use the right pesticide for the pest. And so you don't necessarily need a contact pesticide. So going back to ants. So, ants are a pest that is, they're usually, fairly widespread in a home. But, a bait can work very well for ants because they'll be attracted to the food source. They go in, they eat it, they take that back to their nest, and then they pass away. Wear personal protective equipment, and again, important to point out, the label is the law. So again, read the directions on the label, follow the directions, store the pesticides safely. It's critical you do so in their original containers. There have been a lot of accidents and poisonings as a result of storing pesticides in a container other than what it came in. You want to store the pesticides out of reach of children in a locked cabinet or a garden shed. And what happened there? So we think we're running out of time. Um, so real quick, just some references here. You'll get these slides. We've got some national resources, some extension resources here. One from University of Minnesota Extension on insects that affect homes. And then I believe I have lost slide sharing capability so yes, thank you, Sarah. So just to wrap up, our next webinar is on hoarding on June 29th. You can register at that link. Then if you click ahead, items of importance, there will be a post assessment that's emailed within a few days. So it's a survey link. If you need a certificate of participation, please email Sarah for that. And if you're interested in well-being points from the University of Minnesota, if you're a UMN employee, please go to the Qualtrics link. And again, you don't have to write that down. Sarah will send that to you. And I believe that is everything that we have. So thank you for your time and thank you for hanging in there. I know we're a couple minutes over.
Great. Thanks, Saxton. We do have a couple questions in the chat. And so again, thank you everyone for participating. If you need to run to your next meeting or event, go ahead and do that. We will be sending a follow-up email. There was a question about spraying pesticides outside when you have well water. The EPA has, or the Environmental Protection Agency has info on private drinking water wells. So definitely search that out. I'll put that link in the chat here in just a minute. And then Christina asked about some of the non-toxic options. She lost internet. And so yes, we did talk about some of those. So watch for the follow-up email that'll have the slide deck in there, and you can check that out. You add the link to the Rick, can you add the UML and well-being points link to the chat for us? That link will also be in the follow-up email. And we're hoping folks will help with that post assessment as well. Thank you, Rick. Always quick with those links. Thank you, everyone. I think we can stop the recording, Rick, if we haven't already.